Good morning.
Good morning.
Uh, Today, we're so honored to have you, Carlos, joining us here in the webcast series for the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment. For the benefit of our audience, Carlos Martinez has been our public defender here since 2008, I believe. And during that time has shown an extraordinary commitment and passion for social justice and defending the rights and needs of those the poor and others in need. I am very grateful to have you with us here today, Carlos. This is a very difficult time for all of us with the COVID-19 and the ensuing social unrest that we have lived also following the murder of Mr. Floyd. And it is indeed a time that I think has created a lot of uncertainty, led to what some people describe as a crisis in the justice system. And so I'm glad to have you here with us so that you can give us an idea of how some of these extraordinary events have affected the operations of the Public Defender Office and your ability to advance justice and fairness for those who need it. So let's start with that. Where are you at now? And I hope that you and your family are doing well during all this time, and that folks at your office are also doing well.
We are doing well. Thank you for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. As you know, I've worked with the Melissa Institute since the 90s. So it's been a while, and we have worked, in the office, trying to improve the lives of our clients and trying to be able to better understand what our clients face and what our communities face in terms of violence, and also what violence prevention we can put into place. So this time, extremely volatile, very difficult. It feels like overwhelming because we've had so many issues happen. In particular, the first one being with the COVID-19 crisis, where all of us essentially had to shift very quickly to teleworking. So in terms of the Public Defender's Office, as you know, I manage a team of almost 400 employees. And on any week prior to COVID-19, we had 1,000 visitors in our office weekly. So when we had this shift, the shift was both for the employees. So the employees, we sent almost all of them, it was close to 90%, that we sent home to telework very early on. On March 13th, we started making very early decisions which employees were going to be able to send home quickly so that they can work from home. We had the benefit of two big things that had happened before. About 4 years ago, I guided my office to be completely digital when it came to our client files. So even though there was a lot of resistance way back when to going paperless or going paper light, how we called it, it made the transition fairly easy because all our documents were online, secure, online, so you could access the files. And we had all our attorneys with laptops already for the last 4 years. The other thing that made it very easy for us to actually transition, a lot easier than I expected, and a lot easier than other criminal justice agencies really have not been able to fully transition to teleworking. But the other thing that we did was about 10 years ago, when we worked with Miami-Dade County to actually install video equipment so we could interview our clients on a secure video line from each jail cell. So because we had that already in place, when they shut down the jail to visitors, that was not a problem for us because we already had connections. We also had, for the last 11 years, we have had unfettered access of our clients to call my office at, you know, anytime while we're open, to be able to communicate with us via phone as well. So it's not just video, it's via phone. On any given year, we're receiving 240,000 phone calls, both
Wow.
from the general public and from our clients. Our clients account for about half of that. So it's about 120,000 phone calls. So because our cases are not as high as 120,000, obviously our clients are calling us multiple times. So in terms of transitioning, from the employee perspective, it was fairly quick that we were able to do that. And from the client perspective, we were able to stay in contact with our clients. And as you can imagine, when the visits were shut down for visitors, that meant clients did not have contacts with their families, any physical contact or any even video contact or any contact, even through plexiglass. So that made it very difficult for them.
You're referring to visits to jails and prisons, right?
Visits to the jails.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the COVID was that. How was that managed? That the impact of COVID on the prisons and how it affected the services?
So in the local jails, and our connections are to the local jails.
Yeah.
So to the local jails, what the jail did fairly quickly was to make sure that they had as little contact, physical contact, between inmates and anybody else, particularly because they wanted to reduce the number of transmissions to inmates. And they also wanted to reduce transmissions from inmates to people in the public, just in case that was going on. So early on, we did not know the extent of what was happening to the inmates in terms of how many were positive. And same thing with the jail staff. But early on, probably in the second or third week after the shutdown, testing was made available to corrections officers. So anybody coming into the jail. So at first, because there were not enough tests for a very long time, the tests were prioritized for the guards to make sure that the guards were not bringing it in. So that essentially incapacitated a lot of the guards from being able to come in. But the jail did a fairly good job trying to avoid transmission. So very early on, they set it up where they provided masks. Unfortunately, again, because there was a shortage of PPE, the changes that there was only one mask that they would give, sometimes for a week, sometimes for longer than that. And unfortunately, as you know, those masks are not really very effective if you keep reusing. But you know, early on, at least they put the mask. They started identifying the people with symptoms, and they separated those from everybody else. So they had some medical units, medical observation units, where they put people in those. And then as time went by, they ramped up the testing. They did more than 1,000 tests of inmates and guards. A pretty large number of inmates, particularly in one of the jails, I think it was 40 or 45% of the inmates tested positive. For the overwhelming majority of both inmates and staff were asymptomatic. So as time has gone by, just last week, the numbers are down in terms of who's positive to less than 40 inmates and less than 40 staff, correction staff.
So currently it's not following the same trend that we've seen outside in the city, huh?
It is not. We saw the trend in the jail. It went up. The minute they started doing testing, all of a sudden they realized the extent of community contagion within the jails. Mm-hmm. And it was very alarming, the percentage of people that were testing positive. But the steps that they took, both in hygiene, and also in testing, isolating, separating people. That seems to have worked fairly well in terms of containing it and in terms of getting medical treatment to the people that needed the medical treatment. We did have one of our clients die.
Okay.
And one of our clients was sent to the hospital, was in the hospital, and he passed away. He passed away in the hospital. So you can imagine the impact on the attorneys and the staff that were talking to the inmates was horrendous, not just because of the personal contact, telephonic or video contact, but also because a large number of people were not able to get out of jail.
Right.
And because they were able to get out of jail, a lot of them are desperate. Their families are desperate. Their families were calling the office. So there was a tremendous amount of trauma, not just for the clients, not just for the families, but for our employees who were listening to the issues and really were helpless in trying to get the clients out because many of them, because of the types of charges, they were not able to get out. Also, some of them had more than one charge. And because of that situation, judges were not allowing releases, some of those releases. So it became very difficult on employees. Now, the good news is we had a great deal of success from about March 6th on in trying to get our clients, as many clients out as possible. One of the new things through COVID is that there's been a lot closer day-to-day collaboration between my office, the state attorney's office, the Department of Corrections, and the courts. We have set up systems that we did not have before. So the systems we've set up helped us get about 800 clients released within the first 4 or 5 weeks. And on a regular basis now, we're still getting releases. The collaboration was essential to try to mitigate the horrendous situation that was going on with the infections at the jail. So for example, during the first batch that we were reviewing of clients who were medically vulnerable, we worked, and frankly, in a lot of ways, I worked directly with the top staff at the state attorney's office in reviewing the inmates who were 60 and older and also were medically vulnerable as identified by the jail criteria that the jail had for medical conditions. We did not know the exact medical conditions, but we do know that there were the medical conditions associated with the worst symptoms with COVID-19. So we worked with the 60 and older group first. Then we worked with everybody else who was medically vulnerable. And that group was pretty big. That group was over 1,000 inmates. And then we tried to work out as many agreed releases as possible. What I mean by agreed releases is this. With the first group that we did, we filed motions. We filed requests in the court to get our clients released. And those requests is really an adversarial system. We file it, we argue for it, the prosecutor may or may not agree, and the judge may or may not grant it. And what we realized very quickly that was taking up a lot of court time, and it was not bypassing some of the agreements that we were able to come up with. So what we did right after the first week or two, we started working on agreements on large lists of inmates to be able to identify which ones we could actually come to an agreement on, which ones we could actually get released. And it's been an extremely collaborative process. And the corrections department and also Correctional Health Services, which is the medical contractor through Jackson Hospital. They have been phenomenal in helping us, break through. There's always a lot of red tape, and we've been able to break through the red tape because we're all working together to try to make sure we help as many people as possible, and we keep the jail population down. So that's been essential.
And it sounds, first of all, congratulations for that. It sounds like you are taking a critical moment as an opportunity to transform an adversarial system into a collaborative system, and I think is leaves it if there are any silver linings for what we're going through, it sounds that there might be a lot of lessons learned on how to do things better as we move forward.
Yeah.
Because if this is good for your employees, if it's good for the clients, if it's good for the systems, I could not imagine it stopping after all this is over. So I suspect that that's on your mind too.
Yeah, and look, there are a lot of lessons learned, not just about what is wrong with the system. There's a lot wrong with the system. So we've been able to identify what some of those things are. And now we're at a point where we need to start taking action in fixing some of those problems. Some of those issues are going to require the state legislature to do some things about. Some of those things we will need the county commission to do some things about. Some of those issues we will need agreement, including from the state chiefs of police, from the state attorney, public defender, from the private defense bar, from corrections and other folks. There are some things that we're going to need to come to some agreements on because number one, there are way too many criminal charges that are not a threat to public safety. So for example, driving with license suspended. Right now it is a criminal charge, so obviously the state legislature will have to deal with that and try to decriminalize, particularly when somebody has a suspended driver's license because they're too poor to be able to pay court costs for some other cases that they had in the past, or be able to pay for a traffic ticket. So there are things that we can fix and try to figure out what are some things that we either need to decriminalize or continue it as a crime, but not have the impact on the jail of booking every single one of those people into the jail when in fact we can have them out in the community, making sure that they continue to work and making sure that we don't put additional stress on the jail system, and also the medical care system. It costs a tremendous amount of money to give medical care to people when they're in the jail. And that's something that a lot of folks don't even take into consideration. They just think, well, a crime is a crime is a crime, when that's not the reality. There are some crimes that are extremely serious because they involve death or physical injury to an individual. And then there's a whole series of crimes that are, yes, violations of the law, but some things can be violations of the law without you having to have a criminal system response. You can have a fine, you can have a fee, you can have other types of ways to impose penalties that do not require taking up jail beds, using up police man hours or person hours. Same thing with state attorney, public defender, and the judges. So what this has done is it's crystallized for us where are some things that we need to continue to change. We've done a lot here. Before this, in Miami-Dade County, we were the ones that created, obviously through the state attorney, we were the ones that created civil citation. So people do not get a criminal record. They do get a fine. They do have to do some work, but it is not a criminal record. That was created out of Miami, and that's been duplicated throughout the state and in other parts of the country. So civil citation is one of those. The other one that we take advantage of in Miami-Dade County in a big way is what's called diversion, which is when cases, even though somebody's arrested, the penalty on the case is not a conviction. The penalty on the case is for the person to actually do either some classes, pay a fee, or do something else that's a penalty, but it does not result in a criminal record. We've been very successful and in Miami in doing that, and the result of that has been drops in arrests like no other place in the state of Florida. So our arrest rates for low-level offenses are the lowest of any place in the state of Florida. And the good thing is there has not been a concurrent increase in violent crime or serious crime. Because when these things were proposed initially, what everyone thought was, oh, well, if we're just giving people a slap on the wrist, they're going to come back and come back and come back and commit worse crimes. That is not what happened. The exact opposite is what happened.
Fantastic. So the steps that you and others have been taking in the 11th district circuit and have now paid off big time at this moment, no? With the diversions, the different strategies not to criminalize behavior. I suspect that this idea, the decriminalization of behavior that should not have been criminalized perhaps to begin with, may become an important part of the criminal justice reform that may come in the ensuing month, even in the post-pandemic time. Because, there's some things that come to mind: mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and that I think the pendulum has moved really far in the direction of making it crimes,
Right.
deserve.
Right.
So I imagine that's also part of the situation right now. And are you looking into that?
Well, we've been doing a lot of that in Miami-Dade County through CIT,
Mm-hmm.
the crisis intervention teams,
Okay.
which that's when the police intervene when somebody has a mental health crisis. And instead of the person being arrested for the behavior, they're actually taken to a crisis center to be assessed under the Baker Act.
Okay.
So CIT has worked pretty well. The challenge that we have is we do not have enough funding to have wraparound services for those folks and wraparound mental health services out in the community for the people that are involved through the court system. So in this moment, I think that's going to have to be a big emphasis of what are we allocating to the mental health services system? How much do we need to allocate? Because in reality, if you're allocating the money in that place, you're not spending the money in the jail. We're spending $238 per day to house somebody in the jail. It is costing us a tremendous amount of money. So when we are looking at what is it that we're doing, we need to analyze it in the context of everything. We need to analyze it in the context of what are we spending for what, and is that absolutely necessary to make sure that the public is safe. And that's going to be an important discussion. So I wanted to make sure that I pivoted to this moment also when it comes to the issue of anti-Black racism, because that's been a feature of our system. It's not a bug. It's been a feature of the system. And even those of us who operate within the system, we do not even notice it a lot of times because we have just become immune to seeing the abuses, to seeing the indignity that happens in a lot of situations. And in a lot of situations, it does not result in the arrest of a person, but it does result in the humiliation of a person when they're stopped. A Black person is stopped for nothing. And a lot of times they're not even told what they're stopped for, and they are released. But in the meantime, every other car is passing them by, seeing that they're out of the vehicle, hands on the police car, that they are being searched. So therefore, the rest of us, when we see that, we automatically assume that person did something wrong. So part of the challenge to us is not just look at the brutality that happened to Mr. George Floyd, but to look at the everyday, ordinary injustices that happen, that many of us, I mean, I'm in the defense system, so of course I hear about these because that's my world. And also as an elected official, when I go out around the community, I hear the stories all the time. And in many ways, the changes that have happened or the changes that are being talked about are changes on the worst end, changes leading up to a death, changes leading up to excessive use of force, and all sorts of things, when in fact we have that, but there's a lot more than that we got to change. And it's not just laws, it's the hearts of people who are involved to make sure that we see Black people as human. And a lot of it has to do with implicit bias. And you know, the challenge on implicit bias is there's been a lot of training done. And like any training, and you know this, if the training is not followed up by action to make sure that whatever you learn becomes a habit,
yes,
there's no change. So I am grateful that we've had implicit bias training down here in Miami for public defenders, just so my attorneys, assistant state attorneys, some police departments have had it, but you got to do more than that. And we are doing more than that in my office. We are tracking the areas where there may be some implicit bias, and we're checking ourselves to make sure that that behavior has changed, or that at least we make the unconscious conscious by pointing it out to the attorneys when something just doesn't look right. And we need to do that across systems, whether it's the health system, the educational system, criminal justice system. We need to have not just the training, but we need to figure out, okay, what is the baseline for the behavior that we want to change? And then monitor that, and then report on that.
I cannot agree more with you. And in fact, it links back to your comment of transitioning from adversarial to collaborative modes of operating, because it seems to me that what you are pointing out is that they need not only to conduct silo trainings, you know, but to really, in an integrated way, work together so that there is kind of like a set of values, commitment, principles, and understanding of how we are devaluating the other in our everyday interactions, so that we can all learn together, basically, how to affirm the humanity, how to affirm everybody's humanity in the process as you aspire to justice, you know.
So one of the last things that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned to you is, one of the changes we're considering in Miami-Dade County right now is making sure we bring back civilian oversight of police. We used to have that. It was defunded when we had the last budget crisis in 2009. And at this moment, it is something that the public is demanding to make sure that we have civilian oversight. Now, the big difference from now to 2009 is that the new model includes a critical piece, again, going from the adversarial to the collaborative as well in that arena. The independent civilian panel that Miami-Dade County is going to be considering to establish, one of the key pieces of it is that you have alternative dispute resolution. What does that mean? Right now, in terms of the toolbox that the police chiefs have, essentially when they're dealing with one of these cases where excessive use of force or discourtesy of, you know, an officer with the general public or somebody that they either arrested or they stopped, when you have that system, right now, it really is not set up to do alternative dispute resolution. An alternative dispute resolution would look something like, instead of something going on the disciplined record of that officer, it would be a guided, facilitated discussion between the civilian and the officer to make sure that there's peace, to make sure that there's understanding of why did you treat me this way, and that also the officers are learning through that discussion. They're learning to see the humanity in something else, in somebody else, and also the individual is also learning from the police in terms of what are the pressures that the police face when they have these interactions. Why is it that their behavior sometimes becomes violent or verbally or physically abusive? So I think with the new independent civilian panel, assuming that it gets approved, the part about you know, making sure that there's alternative dispute resolution, to me, that is a great improvement and a great advancement in what we need to do to have better understanding of each other, and to also respect, in particular, respect, you know, the humanity in every individual.
Well, Carlos, I want to thank you for your leadership and for taking this crisis and this critical moment in our history as an opportunity to innovate and move forward with more humane and responsive ways of dealing with the suffering and the violence that our communities are experiencing. At the Melissa Institute, as you know, you've been our friend and supporter since the 90s. We're only a phone call away. So whenever you need our help and support, and would love to be involved more in these conversations about the different trainings and how to assist the police and the community in this the alternative modes of conflict resolution. And but for now, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know a lot of people will benefit from listening to this conversation that we just had, and have a great day. All right.
Thank you so much. You have a great day yourself. Take care.
Bye-bye.